Hi, I'm Lexi S. Brunson, owner and active editor-in-chief of CopyWrite magazine. Today we are here with Dr. Hendricks, who is in the running for Wisconsin State Superintendent.
To be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Could you please share with us some information about you, who you are, where you're from, how your life experience has led up to pursue Wisconsin State Superintendent?
So I was born in Decatur, Illinois, which is a small rural town in Illinois. I lived there until I was 14 when the Board of Bishops assigned my dad to pastor the Church of the Living God here in Milwaukee. Graduated from Custer High School, Milwaukee Public School. Was married. I have two children, Barbara, who's gifted and talented, and Brandon, who has severe disabilities. The marriage did not work out. I ended up getting a divorce, and then I was a single parent on welfare. I went to my son's first IEP meeting and was not satisfied with the way that I was spoken to, and decided that no one would talk to me like that again. So I began to enter into the field of education. I started off as a handicapped child assistant for kindergarten, grade 3, 4, and 5. Then I was a paraprofessional, first and second grade students, while I earned my bachelor's degree from Milwaukee Area Technical College of Human Services and my associate degree from MATC and my bachelor's degree from Springfield College. I then served as a special education teacher for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades while I earned my master's degree in special education. I continued to serve as a special education teacher for students in 7th and 8th grade while I pursued my EDS, which is an advanced master's degree, in order to also secure administrative certifications. I served as a special education supervisor for the Milwaukee Public Schools, wherein I oversaw 6 schools in their special education department. I also served as an assistant principal, a principal, and then I served as district administrator for Urban Day schools. At Urban Day, we were able to increase student achievement from 30% of our students reading on grade level to 70% in 3 years. After I left Urban Day, which was a charter school, I then worked with choice schools through a grant that I received from Milwaukee Public Schools to provide literacy, reading, and math, professional development, and also parental involvement services to families that attended choice schools. I took a pause from my education because I began looking for housing for my son who is disabled and couldn't find anything that I liked. So I decided to start my own nonprofit, and it's called Project Hope Incorporated, to provide housing for adults with disabilities. When a parent has a child with multiple severe disabilities, they usually take care of that child until they die. And I didn't want that to be an option for Brandon. I didn't want to further disable him by have him rely on his mom his whole life. And then the family has to figure out what's going to happen with Brandon. So we established group homes. My son lives in one of the group homes with the roommate. And for Project Hope provides housing for the disabled and also housing for the potentially homeless or homeless people. Was doing that when I was presented with an opportunity to work at the Department of Public Instruction. So I served as Assistant Director of Teacher Education, Professional Development and Licensing, and the Director of the Wisconsin Education Opportunity Program. It was while I was working at DPI that I met our now governor, and I served under under his administration at DPI. When he won the election and became governor, he asked me to leave DPI, and I went over to his office as a member of his senior leadership team and director of his Milwaukee office. And that's where I was working up until November. The reason that I'm running for state superintendent is that I am just vastly disappointed with the economic and educational outcomes of people of color in Milwaukee. We have the largest achievement gap in the nation. We've been deemed the worst place for an African-American child to grow up. We have the highest incarceration rate of African-American males, the highest gap between Blacks and their counterparts in home ownership and business ownership and employment and in unemployment, not to mention the fact that all the health disparities were elevated during the pandemic, when we saw overwhelming number of people of color dying from COVID-19 at its immediate onset in our community. Knowing that we have all of those issues and knowing that now we're looking at how to transition our students back to school, I began to wonder who would lead Wisconsin in that charge. I was first approached in April, again in May, June, July of last year to run. And because I was working with the governor, very invested in making sure that I represent the needs of Milwaukee and also advocate for the needs of the entire state around how to manage the pandemic, I did not want to depart. It wasn't until about September, October, I became very unnerved about what's going on in education. Some people saying our kids need to go back to school, some people saying that they don't. Me having worked at the executive level of the state, I was heightenedly aware of the disparities as it relates to resources in communities of color. And so I decided that I am the best candidate to move Wisconsin away from not only away from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also towards ensuring that we have equitable opportunities for all of our students to succeed. Another thing is, it's very difficult for people of color to run for political office, not because we don't possess the knowledge, skills, and disposition, but because it's a very expensive feat. So I had to save up money from April all the way until November so that I could afford to live while I'm on the campaign trail. See, I don't have any childhood friends that grew up who have a lot of money. I don't have any PAC money behind me, no big organization, no unions. I'm doing this through generous donations, and I have a very grassroots campaign, and I'm very proud of that because then I don't have alliances to any special interests. My accountability is to our children and our parents and our teachers, and it's that simple. And so I do know that I possess the knowledge, similar degrees in education and licensures as many of the candidates. I have a not so common work experience because I started off in poverty and I have worked all the way from the bottom of positions in education to the top as a district administrator. But more importantly, I have a disposition that none of the candidates have. See, as a person of color, I've had to navigate systemic issues that make it very difficult for people of color to actually experience success in this state. So one can read about equity, one could talk to people of color and try to have an empathetic ear or some understanding about equity. But I've lived in equity, so I represent what equity would look like if it were available to everyone. And so that's really what sets me apart. Not only that, because I entered this race as a parent. And so what I represent is the epitome of the highest level of parental involvement. And that's why you hear me talk about parental involvement, because that is so very important. And there is no telling what our parents will do if given the opportunity to excel, if we eliminate the inequities and we open up opportunities for people to move along that trajectory in their own personal lives.
There are some parents who are strongly safeguarding their children for what they feel may be an attack or harm to their child, even when it comes to education. But there's also this conflict with schools placing onus on guardians doing their part and some parents needing schools to take the lead. Do you feel like in today's society, with this extended work demand on many households with only one guardian, especially now in major lack of extended family help, like that village taking care of children, have created a disconnect for parents? And if so, how do you propose schools engage with parents in a way that is mindful of the capabilities of distinct structures and family households?
Well, first of all, when we talk about parental involvement, we have to understand that there are two levels of parental involvement. One is called home-based parental involvement. That is the most important for a child to receive. And with home-based parental involvement, that means the parent is making sure the child is doing their homework, the TV is off, they're going to bed at a decent time, getting plenty of rest, they're getting up early enough to get to school on time, they have their school supplies, they're doing their homework, they're reading to the parents for an hour a night. That is the most important level of parental involvement that a parent can demonstrate. The second type of parental involvement is school-based parental involvement, and that varies along a spectrum. And some schools, school-based parental involvement means that parents are selling pizza and candy and candles in order to make up for budget deficits. And some schools, parental involvement means that parents are sitting on committees and making decisions about textbook adoptions to make sure that their children are reflected in the books that they read. They're making decisions and sitting on interview teams for teachers and administrators. They're helping decide how to use Title I and Title II and IDEA and state funding in the school. So they're have an input in the budget. And so that's a different level of parental involvement. When I was the district administrator of Urban Day School, it was important to me to have parent advocates at both of our campuses, because the parent advocates could help parents as they engaged in whatever type of involvement that they chose to engage in based on what they could do, running the gamut from home-based to school-based parental involvement. And that's very important. In addition to that, my mantra was, once our students hit the door, they become our children. So I don't care what's going on at school. I don't care what their zip code is. I don't care what they don't have. If they don't have the uniforms, we need to provide them. If they're hungry, we need to provide it. If they come to school late and it's after breakfast, the teachers need to have something in the classroom to give the students. So once a child hits the door, parents don't have to be engaged. They can, but they don't have to, because it is the school's responsibility to provide a well-rounded education. And when you do that, you find that you are able to do that which you're responsible for, and you're not dipping into other things. You're not trying to tell parents how to raise their child. Now, a parent coordinator can engage in those conversations, because typically a parent coordinator is a parent leader that's within the community of the school. They have a child who attends the school. And that also lends itself for a parent who has not had a positive experience in school. It may feel intimidated to engage in conversations with the teacher. They will feel more comfortable having a conversation with the parent coordinator. One of the things in my platform is that every school in Wisconsin will have a parent coordinator assigned to help parents decide what level of parental involvement that they want to engage in, as well as support parents at the level that they're engaged in.
So if you win the Wisconsin State Superintendent seat, you will be the first Black individual elected into that role in the state's history. What would that mean to you? And do you think Wisconsin voters are ready for that narrative to be a reality of their choosing?
Wisconsin voters currently have a Black state superintendent, Carolyn Sanford Taylor. She was appointed by the governor to finish his term, and she's a remarkable woman. I had the opportunity to work with her when I served at DPI. What I think it means for the state is that the state will be saying that we are tired of things the way they are. We're going to look beyond the inequities. We're going to look beyond the historic disenfranchisement of people of color. And we are going to open a pathway for someone who in the past may not have had this opportunity. So I'm the granddaughter of sharecroppers, and my grandmother never had a formal education. I am the first person in my family to go to college. On a personal level, me being elected to the state office as superintendent means that our family, who are from the tribe of Cameron and were brought over here as slaves, and generations who served as slaves and as sharecroppers, will finally be redeemed.
Absolutely.
I'm going to pause for a minute, because we talk about, our birthright as African people who were brought over here and slavery. Part of our birthright is being able to achieve at the level of our counterparts. And my ability to be the first elected Black superintendent in a state where we have all of the inequities speaks a lot about my birthright in this country. And it speaks a lot about this country's willingness to change and be on the right side of history. And the fact that the primary election happens during Black History Month, in 2 weeks, Wisconsin can fulfill the first step needed to ensure that I win that election.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold.
Oh, okay. That is
For our students of color, what it means is they will be able to see someone that they identify with in this position, and they will have the ability to aspire to do it themselves. We tell our children to dream big and to break ceilings and to aspire to do what we have not been able to do. But when you have so many things pushing against you with the ism, racism, classism, sexism, all of that, then it's very beneficial that they have a role model that they can look to and say, this can be done. For all of our children in the state of Wisconsin, student of color as well as our white students, what it means is that I will close the achievement gap. But when we talk about the achievement gap, usually we only talk about the racial achievement gap. But there's an achievement gap between white students who live in poverty and white students whose parents have money. There's achievement gap between students who live in rural areas and students who live in suburban areas. There's an achievement gap between students with disabilities and those without disabilities. My goal is to not only close the racial achievement gap, but eliminate all the achievement gaps through equitably funding our schools. Right now, your academic outcomes are predicted by the zip code that you live in. And that's because school funding is based on property tax values. So in the suburbs, property tax on homes are higher. In the rural areas and in some urban areas, the property taxes are lower. And so you get less money. And the reason why money is important is if you don't have money in a school, you can't have a social worker, you can't have a psychologist, you can't have a para coordinator, you can't have up-to-date textbooks. You can't have art, music, gym, FIED, computer science, a library and media. So we have got to rip away our old funding platform that we use and create a funding platform that is equitable and make sure that truly no student, no matter what zip code they live in, experience an equitable education and has the ability to achieve at high rates.
We can all see the major shifts in society when it comes to industry. Tech is on the rise. Our youth are now digital natives, navigating both physical and virtual learning environments. And many challenge the fact that some traditional learning methods are obsolete or must be modified to keep up the pace of the near future. How do you feel about STEAM and STEM practices being part of the normal curriculum in schools, especially in the public arena?
I thank you for that question. First of all, one thing that the pandemic has showed us is that virtual learning is an option, right? And in my Bill of Rights for students, I state that students have the right to receive their education face-to-face, blended, or virtually. That's very important because then we meet the needs of all learners. In addition to that, STEM and STEAM are very important. So in my Bill of Rights, I talk about not only providing instruction in reading, writing, math, science, and social studies, I also talk about the fine arts, and that's where the A from STEM comes from, right? That is important to create a well-rounded education. Coincidentally, the Wisconsin Constitution says that every student is entitled to a well-rounded, sound education. And our legislatures also went so far as to define what a sound education is. And they said it includes reading, writing, math, science, social studies, art, music, humanities, FIED, gym, vocational education. So our elected official and in our Constitution says that our students should have all these things. But yet in some schools, our students don't. So we need to make good on the promises of the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin and make sure that we provide students with a well-rounded education. As it relates to computer science, right now there are not enough people to fill all of the vacancies in that area. And we find that more men are in the field of computer science than women. That's another achievement gap right there. So that's why I'll call for computer science to also be provided to all of our students beginning in elementary school all the way through high school, and not just learning how to read emails and make Word documents and PowerPoints, but also coding, because there's a lot of research that says the skills that are used in coding help students with their computational abilities, and that's mathematics.
A large portion of our audience resides in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Many of them come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and disenfranchised positions in our communities. They are also on the range of more of a creative demographic, and they have found ways to think outside of the box to educate themselves, elevate community, and create skill sets that often are undermined. So, what are some of your policies that you believe will resonate with them in an authentic way?
With community-based organizations. So it takes a village to raise a child. And in K-12, teachers have to make sure that they address the Wisconsin teaching standards and provide instructions and assess students on those. However, we will benefit from community-based partnerships. And I also talk about this in my Bill of Rights for either after school, Saturday, summer school opportunities, so that students can also benefit from the knowledge, skills, and dispositions of educated people in the community that do not serve as teachers.
So we know many constituents now see the importance of voting, like for things like a presidential or gubernatorial race, but they have a disconnect with who sits in office on the more local and state roles. Why do you feel that it is important to continue to activate voters for these seats as well? What exactly does your job entail?
First of all, it's very important that everyone votes for every election. When we think about how much money is allocated to Milwaukee and Milwaukee County and the decisions that are made about what to do with that money, those are elected officials. So if a person is not doing what it is that you think that your community needs, then you need to vote them out. Bottom line. As it relates to, my responsibilities as a state superintendent, I will oversee all of the schools in the state of Wisconsin, funding allocations, the Wisconsin teacher standards, the student standards, the preparation programs for preparing our teachers, our administrators, our principals, and the libraries. And as such, that is a huge undertaking. And as it relates to Milwaukee, because I've served in Milwaukee Public Schools and also because I've lived in urban areas, it is important for voters to know that I need you to vote for me. Wisconsin has a habit of electing rural superintendents to serve as the state superintendent. There would be nothing wrong with that if the rural person had experience in an urban setting, but they lack it. And so having the inability to identify and understand the specific needs of an urban area leaves them at a strict disadvantage. And more importantly, it leaves the people who live in an urban area at a strict disadvantage. And that's why it's so important for Wisconsin to elect an educator that comes from an urban area, because our urban areas are suffering. And me, as a person who understands rural, I also understand when our rural students have challenges getting on a bus that breaks down on the way to school, when they have to spend 2 hours on the bus to get there, when they don't have options of a college or dual credit courses, or they have staffing shortages, I understand that as well. And so as state superintendent, I represent everyone's interest, but I come with a larger lens than those that I am running against. I welcome everyone to look at my Bill of Rights for students, because they're so clear that literally in a year, once I'm in office, you can say, you said that you were going to make sure that there's K3 and K4 for all students in Wisconsin. What happened to that? You can literally check off what I will do and what I failed to do while in office. So it's so much easier to hold me accountable when I've been very clear about what it is that I'm going to do that is measurable and observable, rather than using the feel-good words or the buzzwords that we oftentimes hear from politicians. So in that regard, I believe that I am best positioned to not only fulfill the rights, but also to be held accountable by the voters.
When do we vote? What are our options for voting this time around? And how can we find out more about what is at stake?
Excellent. So the primary is 2 weeks from today. 14 days away. And, you know, I have anxiety, I have everything, a whole gamut of emotions. So you can go to my website and click on my vote. And if you click there, it will take you to another website that will let you know where you go vote. You could go vote face to face. You could go online and request an absentee ballot and you can mail that back in. Or you can submit your absentee ballot to one of the drop boxes in your municipality. It is very important to vote. Obviously, I want your vote. There are 7 candidates on the slate. I would advise that you go to the websites, you read about their platform, you pull down their resume. My CV is available so you can see what I've been doing since 1989 and make an educated choice about who you want to serve. You know, of course, to my Black community, I would be amiss if I did not say that it would mean the world to me if you were vote for me, not just because I'm Black and not just because I understand what we have gone through, but because I am the most qualified. I have the education and experience that my counterparts have, despite what I've had to go through to get it. And other people of color can understand that. I can't come to the table just as qualified as the next person, as a person of color. There's a rule called the 110% rule that I was trained as a child. And my grandmother told me that you can't score 100% and think that you're going to get an A. You have to score 110%. And I've lived my life and I am that 110% candidate. So please vote for me as your next Wisconsin State Superintendent.
Again, this is Lexi, Editor-in-Chief of CopyWrite Magazine, and we want to thank Dr. Hendricks for joining us today to share a little bit about her policies, her positioning, and us getting out to vote.